So hopefully now you are seeing slides that tell you that what we're talking about tonight is how to succeed with APA. Hello and welcome again, and I want to thank you for joining us and taking time out of your schedule to attend this webinar, get a little bit more familiar with APA formatting. My name is Tara, and I've been working with the peer support team at Thomas Edison for a couple years now, since 2022. Today, we're talking about APA formatting and citations, but I also wanted to make sure you're aware that the peer support team can help you with all different aspects of the writing process. So not just the formatting and citations that we'll talk about today, but any aspect of your written assignments, from brainstorming to drafting to finalizing. Even if you want to go over an assignment, and just talk through the instructions, we can help with that as well. So really just all points in the writing process we're here to help with. We have two tutors, writing tutors on our team, myself and Alex. And between us, we cover every day of the week in terms of availability. So if you have anything we can help you with, I really encourage you to email peersupport@tesu.edu, and we'll be in touch with how we can help you out. We have someone else in the waiting room. Okay. Okay. And over the course of this video, webinar, I'll be going over APA formatting. I'll have points where I ask you questions that you can respond to. I'll be showing examples of what I'm talking about. I encourage taking notes if you have anything to write on with you, or if you can type on your laptop if you have that option. But like I said, this will also be available online, the recorded version. So you can always refer back to that if you want to access this information again. Okay, so tonight we are talking about APA formatting. We'll define APA and MLA, but we're mostly focusing on APA formatting. We'll talk about what that formatting is. We will talk about citations that follow APA format. I will ask for some examples from you in the audience if you have anything that you're working on right now. And I'll have some interactive questions about formatting and citations as well as we move along. If you have any questions that come up, please feel free to type them in the chat and we can respond to them as we go. And then we'll also have time at the end if there are any leftover questions or more general questions. So getting into APA and MLA and defining them. If you're not familiar with what APA format is or what MLA format is, these are essentially different sets of rules for how your essay or your paper that you're submitting in a class, how it should look. They go over different formatting in terms of like stylistically, visually, how your paper should look, and also how you're citing information. So how you're showing attribution when you're using information from outside sources. And that would come in the form of in-text citations, references, or a works cited page. Like I said, today we're focusing on APA. MLA is that same rule set of formatting and citing. It's just slightly different rules. So whichever one you're focusing on in a class, we can help with either of them. The reason that we focus on APA today is because most classes at Thomas Edison require APA. So that's why that's the focus tonight. I also wanted to just give some background information about why we have systems for formatting and citations at all. Why do we not just write however we want, whatever feels best for us in terms of stylistically or citing things? It's important to have a system like APA because that type of formatting really ensures that your papers and your essays meet a certain academic or professional standard. It makes it so that your paper is easy to read and understand for whoever your reader is. It makes it so that any important details in your writing are easy to find. And the way that I like to think of it really is that you're putting on a uniform for your writing. So in the same way that someone on a sports team puts on a certain uniform to signify that they are engaging in that sport, you are putting on this uniform of formatting on your writing to signify that you're writing in an academic setting. When it comes to citations and references, there's a couple different reasons why we have a system like APA. One of these is that it clearly differentiates your ideas from the ideas of others. Your reader will have a really clear sense of, okay, these ideas are coming from you, the student, versus these ideas are coming from an outside source that they're using. We want to do this because ethically it is the right thing to do. Intellectual work, so articles that you're reading, sources that you're citing from, the person who wrote them engaged in a form of labor when they wrote them, and citing them is a way of compensating them for that labor. So we have an ethical obligation to have those citations. Another reason that we want to make sure there's that differentiation is as you're developing your own ideas, you want to make sure that your ideas are attributed to you. You don't want that confusion between your ideas, your intellectual labor, and someone else's. Often it is the case that your ideas might be better than the ones that you're citing. So in that case, we really want to make sure we have differentiation between them. So this is just a little bit of the rationale for why we would have a system like APA at all. Okay. So getting into the formatting aspect of APA, as you're encountering assignments, written assignments at Thomas Edison, you may see in the instructions that they call for APA formatting. And I have a list here of what that specifically is. I'll also show an example of what that is, just so we can visualize it. But when you are setting up a paper in APA format, your text will need to be double-spaced and written in a legible, readable font. Usually that's Times New Roman or Calibri, whatever Microsoft Word kind of defaults to is a safe bet for a legible font. Your paper needs to have 1-inch margins, so the space around your text, that should be 1 inch. Your paper needs to have page numbers in the top right corner. And you should have a title page to start out your paper. And on that title page, you'll include the title of the assignment, your name, the name of the university, so Thomas Edison State University, the course that you're in, your mentor's name, and the due date. So a lot of information on that title page, but it does become second nature to put that together. And then the last bit of formatting that I have here is just that you would repeat the title of your paper on the first line of the second page. So even this may feel like an overwhelming amount of information to remember, and that's totally okay. Like I said, it does become second nature eventually to just, okay, I know what goes on a title page and I put it together very quickly. But until you get to that point, there are resources to help you set up your paper with proper formatting. Our other writing tutor, Alex, he put together a short video with instructions on setting up APA formatting in Word and Google Docs. So if you ever find yourself unsure what to do, you can reach out to us and we can send that over to you very quickly. Or I could even, now that I'm thinking about it, we could send out that video to the attendees of this webinar also. The APA website itself, which is just apastyle.apa.org, that is a great resource for APA formatting. They have all of their rules listed there, so you can always access it there. The Purdue Online Writing Lab is one of the writing resources that's listed in Thomas Edison's course modules. And so their website has a lot of information about setting up your paper in APA format. And then Scribr, which is another website, also has instructions for doing that. And then you can always email peer support. So peersupport@tesu.edu if you want to check that you've formatted something correctly or if you have questions about formatting. You'll also have access to this webinar if you want to ever refer back to these slides. So here I have a visual example for us. So I just listed all of the rules of setting up formatting, but this is a visual of what a title page would look like. You can see that you have that page number in the top right corner. You have your paper title, which is bolded. A couple lines underneath that, you'll have your own name, then the university name, the course name, the mentor or instructor name, and then the date that the assignment is due. So this is what a title page should look like in terms of formatting. And you can see also that the page spacing, it's double spaced here, and that would continue on into your actual writing. I believe my next slide has a question for us. Yes, okay. So thinking about what we've just heard about a title page, I have an example here that is incorrect. Can anyone tell me what is incorrect about this title page? What's missing or what's wrong with it?
Mentor's name's not on there.
Yes, so the mentor's name is not on there. Thank you. Christina also mentioned the title. So yes, the title is not in the correct place. The title should be what's bolded on the first line, and then your name would be on the one underneath that. There is one other thing that's missing from this title page. Yes. Oh, there's two things. I apologize. Page number and course name. So yes, underneath Thomas Edison State University, you would want to have the course name and then your mentor's name. And then you would also need the page number in the top right corner. Okay, perfect. I apologize if you can hear the plane that is passing by in the background. I have another example of a block of writing on the following slide, and we want to talk through what's incorrect about that as well. Let's see. Okay, so looking at this, if we were to imagine that this was a paragraph in a Word document that we were submitting for a paper, what would be incorrect about the way that this is formatted? The font, yes, absolutely. So the font is not quite legible. We would want something much closer to Times New Roman, Calibri, something like that. And then also, yes, it is not double spaced. So we would want to make those changes to make this in line with APA formatting. Oh, we have someone else in the waiting room. Mitt. Okay, perfect. Yes, also, if this was the start of our paper, we would want to have the title bolded and centered on the first line of that page. So that is great. Okay, so I believe that's all I have about formatting. So I want to then get into, oops, references and citations. Okay, so that is the other half of APA. On the one side, we have formatting, setting up how your paper visually looks. On the other side, we have citations and references. In-text citations and references are the two parts of that. So we'll start with in-text citations. And again, I have kind of an explanation and then some examples, and then we'll talk through potential error situations. So an in-text citation is what you're going to use in the body of your paper when you've either quoted or paraphrased information from another source. And you're using that in-text citation to give your reader information to find the full reference on your references page. So basically, an in-text citation is an abbreviated version of all of the reference information in case your reader wants to find that full reference information. For the most part, when you're using an in-text citation, it's going to be housed in parentheses, and you'll have the author's last name, a comma, and then the year of publication. So if I was citing something from myself that I had written in 2024, I would have open parentheses, Kinnett, which is my last name, comma, 2024, the date that I theoretically published it. For the most part, that is what the in-text citation will look like. There are, of course, sources that you'll encounter that don't have the information that you need. And so these are some of the more common situations. You might use a source that does not have an author. So in that case, you would use a shortened version of the title in quotation marks and then the year of publication. So as an example, I have parentheses, quote, selected poems, end quote, comma, 2024. Sometimes you'll encounter a source that doesn't have a publication date. So in that case, assuming you have the author's last name, you would use last name, and then the abbreviation ND, which stands for no date. Sometimes you'll encounter sources that have multiple authors. So in that case, if you had two authors for the source, you would do last name and the year. And sometimes you'll have a source that has even more than that. So if it's three or more authors, you use the placeholder et al. So the last name of the first author that's listed, et al, comma, and then year of publication. You can see that essentially you're keeping the same basic information for any source that you're creating an in-text citation for. You're just kind of, if needed, changing it depending on what the source has available to you. I see the question. Yes, playback will be available. We'll have a recorded version of this uploaded into Moodle after the webinar is finished. Okay. So these are some examples of in-text citations. I did want to also clarify paraphrasing versus quotation. So you use an in-text citation when you're paraphrasing or quoting. A direct quote, if you're not familiar with that term, is when you're using the exact wording from a source. And when you use the exact wording, you need to house that information in quotation marks. When you are directly quoting, there's an additional piece of information in the in-text citation, and that is either the page or paragraph number where you got that quote from. So instead of just Connect 2024, I would have Connect 2024 and then P.5 if I theoretically got it from page 5. Sometimes you'll encounter a source that doesn't have a page number, so in that case you would use paragraph number instead of page number. Sometimes we want to include information from a source, but we don't want to directly quote. We would rather rephrase those ideas in our own words. You do, in that case, still need to provide an in-text citation because you're still using someone else's ideas. But in that case, this is called a paraphrase, and you don't need to have the page number in the in-text citation. You only have last name and year. So no page numbers are needed for paraphrase. Okay. So I have another example here where I want us to see if we can identify what is incorrect with the in-text citation with this quote. So there are two things incorrect about this in-text citation. Yes, so this theoretically, we're assuming this source has an author. I know that it does, which is kind of cheating on my part. But instead of what we would assume to be the title, we would want the author's last name here instead. And then, yes, we also need, because it is a direct quote, you can see it's housed in quotation marks, we need the page number or the paragraph number after the year of publication. So great, we have identified the errors in this in-text citation. Okay, and that brings me then to the last part of putting together APA, which is the reference page. The reference page is a list you have at the end of your paper, which is every source that you've used in your paper. And each reference for each source has all of the information that would be necessary for a reader to find that source on their own. The reference page should always start on a new page, and it should have the word references bolded and centered at the top of that page. Your references are also always listed alphabetically, always double-spaced, and they should have a hanging indent. And I have an example of what this looks like on a future slide. I also wanted to note that you should never include a source that you did not use in your paper. Sometimes when we are researching, we find a source that looks really interesting and we think, oh, this will be great, but we don't end up actually using it in the paper. In that case, you would not want to have it on your reference page. Every source listed on the reference page should have a clear connection, either through paraphrase or quote, to some place in the body of your paper. The individual references on your reference page all contain essentially the same information, but the structure of how they are put together is going to change depending on what type of source it is. And so what I mean by that is a book has a slightly different structure of reference than a film or an article in a scholarly journal or any other kind of source. So it's going to be slightly different between types of sources. They'll generally always include the list of information that I have there. You should typically always have an author if the source has an author. You'll want to include the title of the source, the title of the container, which by that I mean if you have an article that's published in a journal, the journal would be the container. If you have a web page that is published on a website, the website is the container of that page. A chapter is housed in a book. So the container is like the larger vessel that has the smaller source. A publisher, academic sources will often have a volume or an issue and page numbers. And then if you're accessing sources online, you should always include the URL or DOI, which is kind of another version of a URL. You should always have that if it is an electronic source. I wanted to note that citation generators exist where you kind of just put the link of the source into the generator and it will generate a citation for you. And Scribr is a site that has a citation generator, and they can work. They can be helpful, but they are very frequently not reliable. So while they can be a good way to kind of get started with citations, it's very important to double check your reference entries to make sure that they're correct, or to reach out to peer support and work with us to ensure that the reference entries are correct. So if you do want to use the citation generator, that's totally fine, but you just want to have that double check to make sure that it is correctly generated. Okay, and then this is an example of what a reference page would look like. So this would come at the very end of your paper, and it's that list of every source that you've used within your paper. You can see that at the top of the page, we still have our page numbers. We have the word references bolded and centered, and then we have a list of the reference entries. They are alphabetized. They have the hanging indent, which by that we mean the first line of the reference is all the way flush left, and then second, third, possibly fourth lines are indented once. And we can see that it's double spaced as well. So this is what your references page would look like. I don't have like questions about spotting errors in references just because they are very detailed and specific. So I thought it could get a little difficult, but I do have this example here of what a reference page should look like. And then I also wanted to show you this. I mentioned a little earlier the Purdue Online Writing Lab, and their website, along with Scribr, has these structures of what reference entries look like for all different kinds of sources. Truly, any kind of source that you could possibly imagine, they have the structure listed of what that reference should look like. And this is just an example that I've screenshotted from their webpage. So if you were citing a web page or piece of online content and you're putting the reference together, they've listed what that should look like. You can see last name and then first and middle initial, the publication date in parentheses, the title of the page italicized, the site name, and then the URL. And then a lot of times, in addition to that structure, they give you an example of what it looks like as well. So this, following that structure and pulling out the pieces of information from the source, that can be tedious when putting together references, but, and this is the English teacher coming out in me, it's a great way to get familiar with references so that you know what it's supposed to look like and you know where to find the information on your sources. Citation generators can be great in terms of putting things together quickly, but really digging into the structure of references and putting them together yourself just makes it a lot more familiar and a lot less overwhelming over time because you kind of know what you're doing, you know what to expect. So that's just my personal PSA of feel free to check out the Purdue Online Writing Lab. Check out the structures that they've got and get familiar with what references look like. Okay, this has been a massive amount of information. I want to open it up now to the audience and just hear what you have to say, hear any questions you have. I would love to talk through anyone's experiences or feelings about APA before tonight. If you have any current assignments that you're working on, or if anyone wanted to talk about any confusion or questions or struggles. So I open it up to the audience now. Okay, I see a question in the chat. Do our paragraphs have to have titles? Often in an APA style paper, you will have sections that have section headings or titles. You certainly do not need one for every paragraph. It will depend on the style of the paper if it makes sense to break it up into sections that have their own titles. But it's definitely a case-by-case basis with papers. Other questions or feelings about APA? Would it be centered and bolded? So the APA formatting has a whole like guide on formatting for different levels of headings. Your title is always going to be centered and bolded. And then when you go into a subsection, so like a section title, it's flush left and bolded. And then if you have subsections within that, there's another style for it. But I can also send a link on like the different formatting. But for the most part, it's usually just the title centered and bolded, and any subsection below that is flush left and bolded. How to do an annotated bibliography. So with an annotated bibliography, that is an assignment where you're finding sources on a topic, you're putting together the bibliographic reference. So what we saw on the reference page, you're putting together that information. And then for each source that you find, you're writing a paragraph, maybe 2 paragraphs, where you summarize the source and evaluate its credibility. I know there are several courses at Thomas Edison that require an annotated bibliography as one of the assignments. And if you did want to go over that assignment in more detail, we could definitely talk one-on-one. I could review what you have so far, but essentially it's finding sources, putting together the reference entries for those sources, and writing a paragraph or 2 about each source. Okay, next question. Is the title page separate from the paper, and is there a header for the paper itself? So the title page is, it's all in the same document, but it is its own page. So you'll have your title page, and then you'll start your paper on the second page. On the second page, you'll repeat your title on the first line, but other than that, there generally isn't an additional header for student papers. In some classes, especially the capstone, they will ask for an additional header within the paper itself. It's called the running head, and it's like an abbreviated version of the title that you have in the same kind of level as the page number, but that's typically only in the capstone class. And that's again something that we could definitely check on or go over if you were working on an assignment that specifically required it. Struggling with capstone, very common, very difficult course. Capstone is a very difficult course. And I would say maybe even 50% of the students that we work with in peer support are people who are trying to finish their capstone and work on that paper and the papers that go along with it. I would definitely recommend emailing peer support, just peersupport@tesu.edu, and letting us know a little bit of the detail of what it is that you're struggling with. And either myself or Alex, we can meet with you one-on-one to go over what you're working on and see how we can help you finish up those papers. Right, this is great. Any other questions or anything people wanted to share about APA? One thing I would add is because I know I've just dumped so much information on you all. And it can feel overwhelming, and the rules can feel arbitrary and tedious. And as someone who works with them every single day, I totally feel that. It does get easier. It's kind of like learning a language, whereas when you first encounter it, you don't know the rules, doesn't make a lot of sense. But the more you interact with it, the more kind of second nature it becomes. And with peer support, with websites like the Purdue Online Writing Lab, if you keep interacting with it and keep trying and putting it together, it does just become much easier. Okay, we have a question. Are the references right next to the material or at the bottom? So the answer to that is kind of both. We went over the in-text citations and the reference page. In the body of your paper, when you quote or paraphrase, you'll have an in-text citation, which is that abbreviated version, author's last name, date of publication. And then again, on your last page or pages, you'll have your references. So that's at the very end of your paper. And that's where you have the full reference entry. So it's both in-text citation in your paper, reference page at the end. Can you use footnotes when doing APA? I actually do not know the answer to that question off the top of my head. I've seen papers that utilize footnotes, but it's not a system I'm personally very familiar with right this second. It's something I could certainly research and get information on, but I'm not sure about that right now. Any other questions or anything we want to share about APA? Okay. I don't want to cut anyone off, so if you are typing anything, please feel free to keep typing, or if you wanted to add anything. But it seems as if we might not have any more questions. So in that case, I just want to offer a huge thanks to all of you for attending tonight, for sharing your questions, for participating in the little interactive reviews. I really enjoy working with all the Thomas Edison students. And if you have further questions, if you have papers you're working on, if you have assignments that you're not sure how to get started with, and if you have questions outside of writing, we also have two peer coaches who are extremely helpful with anything from time management to navigating Moodle to scheduling exams, just the whole kind of academic process at Thomas Edison. The peer coaches are really great resources for that. So if you do have further questions, I really encourage you to email peer support, just peersupport@tesu.edu. We answer all of our emails within 24 hours max, although I would say it's very rare that it's that long to get back to you. So you'll always have an answer within a day. With the writing tutors specifically, you can email us to set up a meeting, or if you ever wanted to send in a paper for review, we can provide feedback on that paper within 24 to 48 hours, though again, it's often much sooner than that. And yeah, I just encourage you to make use of this resource from Thomas Edison. It's all completely free. And I believe that that's all that I have for tonight. So if no one has any other questions, then we're free to go and wrap up. And I hope you're all having a great start to your semester and time here. Oh, we have something in the chat. Thank you. Yes, thank you so much. Thank you. I'm so glad it was helpful. And APA questions will come up again and again, so don't hesitate to reach out.